we're going to be talking about a sequencer, and basically what I'm going to be calling a MIDI handler. So essentially, you press keys on the keyboard, the MIDI signals go into the system, and there's a chance before they actually hit the sound generator that you can record them and replay them, and that's going to be the sequencer. In addition to that, you can also edit how they go into the sound engine. What I mean by that is you have a slight opportunity to play with the frequencies. In this case, I'm going to be adding a Portamento function to it as well. Right now, we get MIDI changes, do sustain, and we set the current frequency that the synthesizer is going to be dealing with. This is what we're going to be replacing, so let's get rid of that. And in its place, we're going to put the MIDI handler. Whoops, I'm not doing this right. All right, so our synthesizer has a couple of things going on here. Here at the beginning, down here on the very left, this is the sequencer stuff. This top knob runs the speed of the sequencer. This bottom one is its mode, so sequencer off, record mode, forward, backwards, random motion, whatever. Then this middle here is a repeat function, which we'll talk about later. And following it is the Portamento function. So you have Portamento speed here. And then this toggle switch has nothing to do with it. And then these buttons at the bottom are also part of the sequencer as well. So yeah, let's go back. Okay, the first thing to check is if we're going to be taking external inputs and interpreting them, or if we're actually going to be instead letting the sequencer input the next MIDI signals. So we're going to check that first. All right, so if the sequencer is on, otherwise, if we're not in arpeggiator mode, if it's completely off, then when we go back to, say, record mode or whatever, we want to hit a reset. So let's do that. These note sustains also handle what notes are currently active. This is a 32-bit microcontroller, and so these memory locations have 32 bits in them. Instead of storing like a vector or something, what I'm doing is I'm just saying that bit 0 is associated with key number 1 on the piano, and bit number 1 is key number 2, and the final note sustain is just a way to see if anything's on at all. If we're not in sequencer mode, we reset the sequencer. If we've already reset it, we don't have to do all this work. Then we just say whatever is the MIDI note value that came in from the keyboard, we're going to set as the current note to play. All right, so after we've realized the note that we want to play, right, so if a note's been triggered, we recognize it, then we move on and we want to check to see if notes are currently being pressed when the new one came in. So this will be important for Portamento. If we're sustained, then we enter glide mode and maintain whatever the previous frequency was. Otherwise, if we're not in sustain mode, then we're going to realize that this is the first, there's only one note being played, and that's whatever just came in. And since it's the first note that just came in a run of things, then what we're going to do is recognize that, hey, the ADSR envelopes for both the filter and the end amplitude need to be reset because we just put a key, so that's the trigger for the ADSR envelopes. So now we're going to set whatever the note value is that we want to play, and then also its frequency. Now this is actually not what's going to be playing. This is just the current note in the system that it wants to play. And by that I mean if you have a Portamento set and it's going to glide up, then as you're gliding, the intermediate frequency values that you're changing as you glide are the current note that's being played. But of course the current note in play is not what's being played, it's what the glide's going up to, if that makes sense. now that we know what note that we want to play, we have to set the sustain values. Let's also blink a light whenever a note's being played. So, okay, so we've handled a key press, right? So note's been triggered. How about a key release? Okay, so if a note was released, let's recognize it. And then we're also going to do something very similar and update our note sustain values. Okay, if all the keys are depressed, then there are no more notes being sustained. If we let go of the keyboard completely, then there are some other things that we also need to reset. So for example, in glide mode, you need to reset the glide point, and you need to just halt whatever it's doing at the moment. Okay, so we're also going to reset the note frequency. This is the current note. This is the note frequency that we're approaching. That way, whatever happens, we approach a frequency of 0. So, and then we're also in glide mode, and we're going to light up an LED, or we're going to turn off an LED when we stop things. All right. So otherwise, if we release a key and we still have some keys pressed, then we keep glide mode on. Also, just a note for this specific code, there is a bit of a bug. There are a couple bugs. For example, in glide mode, if you do a sequence of glides, eventually the glide will end, and so that still hasn't been figured out yet. There are some things at this point that we do want to address as far as the sequencer goes. If we're in edit mode and the arpeggiator, the sequencer is on, then when we exit the sequencer editor mode and we're going into play mode, we don't want it to persist any values when we enter it. We want to just clear everything out and allow the sequencer to start from scratch, basically, so nothing's sustained and so forth. And so we'll handle it this way. So if the the sequencer is on, and we're done editing, then reset the sustain values. All right, now there's also something else with the sequencer, and that's when you decide to turn notes on and off. So as you progress through notes, then basically it's a key press, and how long you hold that key should be controlled. So right now, what we're going to set it as, just in a preliminary way, is that notes are held for half the duration of the speed of the playing. So in this case, we're going to define a midpoint. And this sort of it's just some scaling. Okay, and finally, the last thing to do is to convert the current note or the current frequencies into the current to play frequency into the frequency that we want the sound engine to actually produce or utilize. And so that's where the glide comes in. If we're not using glide mode, then the note frequency that we want is just going to become the current frequency. If we have glide mode on, then we're going to drag the current frequency to the frequency that we're trying to apply. And so this is one of the ways that you can do that. So here we have this TG variable. This TG increments up from 0 to some value. Here the value is 1000. So as we count up, we hit 1000, reset it, and then we're going to perform this low pass filter sort of deal that just drags the current frequency to the frequency that we want. Okay, otherwise, if we're not in glide mode, we don't need to worry about dragging the frequency here. We're just going to set the current frequency to be the current note frequency that we would like. All right, and then we're going to turn off this LED. Okay, that's everything except the arpeggiator, the sequencer. So if the sequencer is on, we're going to check to see if we've just entered into sequencer mode for the first time. If we have, we want to reset the sequencer. So we're going to acknowledge that we're resetting the sequencer, start the sequencer count to 0 and some other counts, and then reset our LEDs that give us what note we're currently on in the sequencer. Okay, now for the sequencer itself. If we've just done the reset, but we haven't started the sequencer yet, then we're still in edit mode. If we're in edit mode, we need to be able to save the notes that we're playing in a sequence in some stored set of values. That way we can play them back. All right, so if we haven't reached the end of our sequencer value and we haven't started the sequencer, then what we're going to do is we're going to look for key presses. If we press a key in this mode, then we want it to save. That way we go into a sequencer mode and we just play what we want to hear in the sequencer and it'll save it. So if we hit a key on the keyboard, then we save whatever MIDI note that we pressed into the sequencer list. Set the note that we want to play also to this value. That's just so that way you can hear what notes you're putting in the edit mode, just to get that feedback. Increment the counter and then light up the LED. You'll see this when we actually do it. And then if we release a note, then we are going to make sure that the current note to play is also the MIDI note that we pressed. That way we can, further down, we can handle the sustain correctly. So everything here is as if we just pressed a key normally, except we also do this and this. So we just save the value, increment the counter, and light up an LED. That's it. All right, otherwise, if we are in sequencer play mode, then we want to replay these notes back to us. Okay, so if we actually play a note that the sequencer didn't play, but we did, then we perform an offset to the first note in the sequencer list, get a difference, and we just apply that offset to all the notes in the sequencer. And we also don't want to hear what we press on the keyboard. Since we're in play mode, we only want to listen to the sequencer, even if we press notes. Okay, so after we get that offset, then we actually want to run the sequencer itself. So this first part is to check to see if we're going to step through the sequencer, is what this part does. And then basically if we run out of bounds, then we're going to reset the sequencer position. In addition to that, we also want to figure out if we want to repeat the sequence or not. So once we get to the end of the sequence, this will also take care of, well, we do want it to repeat, so we're going to also reset and replay. And that's how we're going to do this. Okay, now it's time for the actual playing. Okay, so at this point, if our count is 1, so we're on some sort of time path here that extends from some point every time the sequencer wants to play a note to this midpoint times 2 counter. So that's the length of the note play. And shortening this length is also how we adjust the speed of the tempo of the arpeggiator, of the sequencer. So start it off. If the note is not 0, then we're actually playing something. Then we apply our offset. Save the previous note to play. This is just in case we do a glide mode on this thing. That's for the future. And signal that we trigger the note. So that's the note to play, note trigger point. And also we update our midpoint. That way, if we change tempo in the middle of a sequence, then it doesn't screw up the timing. Just on the next beat, it updates everything. Following this, we stop the note. So at the midpoint, then we have the note to play. We set as the previous note if we're in glide mode, and we do a note released. And actually, that is the entire MIDI handler and sequencer right there. All right, so there's the entire synthesizer so far. All this will, of course, be soldered together. Oh, another thing to mention, because as you add stuff to the sequencer, all these will light up, and that becomes a significant power draw. And so what you need to do is get an external supply to power all this stuff. And the way to power that is to power the shift registers that they're all connected to. And then you just make sure you connect the ground from your power source with the MSP, and that any voltages going to the MSP are set at its maximum or lower voltage. All right, everything's powered up and running. Let's go ahead and, yep. Oh wait, that means I can show you the different waveforms because I got them all up here too. All right, so press different keys on the keyboard and you get different frequencies played out. All right, so we can do sine waves. We can do square waves. We can also do these awesome triangle waves and saw waves. And we'll be adding more on there later. I have 2 more spots for waves. We'll see what they are. We'll go here to edit mode and put stuff in. And you can see as I press notes, some lights light up. And I know it's blurry, that's just because I have a terrible camera. But you get the gist. Then you can get out of edit mode. So now you're in play mode. And let's see if it, does its thing. Ah, there we go. Isn't that great? And then we can change the waveform here. We can also adjust the speed too. Alright, let's go ahead and get it out of sequencer mode. Alright, so now it's just normal play mode. And I also forgot to mention, let me show you the glide. So I'm going to play a couple of notes here and you'll notice some seem like staccato. Or not staccato, but one after another, and others the frequency changes and glides up to it. Yeah, that's all Portamento really is. But let me show you about this repeat. I have this toggle switch that's lit currently. And if I turn that off, it turns off the repeat function. So let me do this for you. Let's go back into edit mode. And I'll just put something really quick. Okay, there we go. Alright, so that's 4 notes playing a sequence. We can run it really fast. Slow it down. Then we'll turn the latch off. So it ends. Now it's still in sequencer play mode. but it only goes through the sequencer once. So when I press a key, we'll hear it again. And even though it stopped again, remember I did that offset. So if I press a different note, it'll also change. Alright, we'll go to play mode. Slow that down so you know what it sounds like. And then you can always go back into edit mode here and then press what you want to change and change that note if you wanted to. And we can repeat it. Just like that. And then you can add other stuff in. Change the waveform. Also add the second oscillator in. And we can also detune it a little bit. Just like that. And we can add a little bit of noise if we wanted to. If we go back to the sine waves, we can do just a slight detune. Do you hear that? If you can hear it, the amplitude is also pulsing. Yeah, that's basically the sequencer. Right now I have the oscillators almost done. There's a couple of special features I'm going to add in for you later, but you'll see that at the end product. Then I have the mixer done, and now I have the sequencer and the Portamento function also included. And yeah, that's kind of that.